Welcome back. Some art history today, some Inspiraggio channel. And we got the painting that changed history forever. Thinking this is Pablo Picasso we got right here. See what we got.
In 1907, Pablo Picasso invited a small group of friends and fellow artists to his studio in Paris. He wanted to show them a painting he had been working on for 6 months, but their reaction was not what he expected. The painter Georges Braque compared the experience of seeing this picture to drinking gasoline.
Okay, that's a little crazy.
Henri Matisse, one of the most important artists of his time, described the women in the painting as horrible. The painting would not be exhibited
Basically changing beauty standards and cultural standards, I guess. And they didn't like that.
publicly until 1916, almost a decade later, and yet today it is considered one of the most important works in the entire history of art, the cornerstone of modernism and the catalyst for one of the most influential artistic movements of the 20th century.
So they were wrong.
But what is there in this image that generated so much rejection and so much admiration at
Obviously, it's the faces.
the same time? And why, more than a century later, does it remain so controversial? This painting is called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and Picasso painted it in 1907 when he was just 26 years old and had been living in Paris for 3 years. Today, it is held at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where it was acquired in 1939. But that was not its original title. When Picasso finished it, he called it the Brothel of Avignon, a name that made direct reference to a street in Barcelona famous for its brothels. But the title was changed in 1916, just before its first public exhibition, to make it less controversial. That change of title already tells us something about the nature of this work. From the very beginning, there was a tension between what the painting actually showed and what the world was willing to see. When we look at the painting, we see 5 naked women staring directly at us.
Yeah.
3 of them have human faces, though distorted, and the other 2 have something completely different.
Yeah, the two on the right are like, originally you think, are these tribal masks? Or are they like something else? Are they even human?
Their faces look like masks, painted with diagonal lines running down their cheeks like grooves carved into wood. Their noses are elongated and concave, and their jaws are exaggerated, abnormally round. Their bodies do not follow the laws of perspective that had dominated European painting since the Renaissance. The forms of these women are flattened, fragmented, and reduced to angles and geometries that the eye does not quite know how to read. Their arms and legs
Yeah, this is, of course, coming out of the age ever since photography became a thing. Obviously, art changed a little bit because, I mean, you can capture everything with a camera. We don't have to get as realistic as possible, but there was still that taste of realism in the 19th century. So I'm guessing when we turn the 20th century, things get a little crazy, and a lot of the old guard probably didn't like that.
brush against the edges of the canvas as if the figures were about to break out of it. The curator of the Musée Picasso in Paris, Joanne Senrec, describes how with this painting, Picasso did not just change one thing, but changed everything at once. And that, even for artists who were already experimenting with new styles at the time, felt like he had gone too far. But to understand why this painting would change history forever, we need to know the context in which it was painted. In 1907, Europe was in the middle of its imperial expansion. France and other colonial powers controlled vast territories in Africa, and as a consequence of that expansion, African art objects were constantly arriving in Paris museums, where they were displayed as exotic curiosities from cultures considered primitive. That same year, Picasso visited the Musée d'Ethnographie du Trocadero in Paris, where a collection of African tribal masks and sculptures immediately caught his attention. Picasso himself described that visit by saying the masks had seemed like magical objects to him, and that just like him, they were against everything. What struck him was not just their appearance, but also the way they worked. The faces were simplified, distorted, and even unsettling to him. It was a completely different approach to the human face, one that allowed him to move away from naturalism and towards something more abstract and disturbing. And that is exactly what he did. But this is where the story gets complicated. What Picasso did with the African masks was not simply draw inspiration from them. He incorporated them directly into his painting, transforming the faces of 2 of the 5 women into the masks that were on display at the Trocadero Museum.
And because of that, people were like, "Oh no, Africa, we don't like that."
And for decades, art history celebrated that as an act of genius, though not everyone agreed. The fact that a European artist had borrowed these masks, incorporated them into his masterpiece, and thanks to that gone on to be considered the genius who changed art forever, was not entirely right when the cultures that created them were still being described as primitive. But Picasso himself never acknowledged any of this. In 1920, he told a critic who was working on an article about African art that he had never heard of it, a denial that,
Kind of crazy. Kind of stains your legacy a little bit if you know, you don't actually tell the truth.
in light of everything we know, is difficult to take seriously. But the initial reactions of horror that this painting generated did not last long. Since the Renaissance, European painting had followed a set of rules about perspective. Everything in a painting
Rules.
had to be organized from a single point of view, as if the viewer were looking through a window at a real scene. Bodies had to be harmonious, light had to come from a logical place, and space had to have depth and coherence. For more than 400 years, those rules defined what a good painting was, so it makes sense that the first reactions to this work were ones of horror. In Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, there is no single point of view. The figures are seen from different angles at the same time. A woman can have her torso facing forward and her head in profile. An arm can have a shape that does not correspond with the rest of the body, and the light comes from nowhere in particular, appearing and disappearing according to the needs of the composition.
Yeah, I don't even think about all that stuff not being, an artist or one that's very inclined in art. I just look at it and I see what I see. But to his point, the shadows, the realism, the perspective, very different.
What Picasso proposed with this painting was a completely new idea for its time. He suggested that a painting did not have to imitate reality as we see it, but could show multiple perspectives of the same thing simultaneously. That idea was the seed of Cubism, and Cubism was the
Cubism.
seed of practically all the modern art that came after it, from abstraction to expressionism, from surrealism to conceptual art. Everything we today consider modern art owes a direct debt to the decision Picasso made in this painting in 1907. Interestingly, Georges Braque, the same man who compared the experience of seeing this painting to drinking gasoline, ended up becoming Picasso's closest collaborator in the development of Cubism. By the 1920s, what had caused disgust began to be seen as revolutionary. The writer André Breton hailed it as a masterpiece and convinced the collector Jacques Doucet to purchase it. And in 1939, the MoMA in New York acquired it as a cornerstone of its collection. Today it is considered, in the words of historian John Richardson, the first unequivocally 20th century masterpiece and the primary catalyst of the modern movement, the cornerstone of 20th century art. But that same celebration has continued to generate debate. African artists have openly expressed their opposition to this work. The Ugandan artist Francis Ngenda even went so far as to say that although people tell him his work looks like Picasso's, they are wrong. It is Picasso who looks like Africa. More than a century after Picasso painted Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, it remains his most controversial work. This painting did not only change the way artists think about space, form, and perspective, it also forces us to ask what it means to create something new, where inspiration truly comes from, and who gets the credit when that inspiration crosses cultural boundaries. What do you think? Are we looking at a true masterpiece, or an act of cultural appropriation? I will be reading your comments.
That it? I think that's it. Let's get back to the painting. Let's get back to the painting, wherever it's at. There we go. Yeah, I look at this and I I see rigidness. I see hard angles. I see touches of realism and like obviously the fingers and some of the bodies and faces, but it's obviously distorted. The colors, not natural. You have like a little fruit bowl or something in the front, just almost like a tease that this was potentially going to be more realistic and natural, but it went crazy and w- went into its own direction. Now it's obvious given the context that we have on Picasso with going into those museums that these mask faces were mused from that. So I don't know why he would lie per se. I guess, he didn't think people would know. But nevertheless, the eyes are not even aligned. Everything's just off. It's so interesting. It's so interesting to look at art and try to form a rationale, especially within a time where realism started to wane and experimentalism started to be more of the everyday. Well, thank you guys so much. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know our next art history video. Peace out and bye bye.